consciousness is the ocean. It is not a small phenomenon. The problem that we are having with quantum mechanics and general relativity is not a problem of gravity, is not a problem of an equation. It is a problem of fundamental principles. Both are ignoring something very big. Now, how can we explain quantum mechanics and general relativity using our four-dimensional theory of consciousness? Consciousness, being a totality, a higher dimensional totality, exists everywhere at all times. And the fundamental property of this consciousness is watchfulness. It is watching and being aware of its own totality. A disturbance creates perceptual localization of consciousness. This is important to understand. Consciousness itself cannot be agitated, cannot be disturbed. But perceptually, there can be agitation, there can be disturbance. Just like you can stand in front of the sun and you can wave your hand in front of your eyes, and it makes it harder for you to see the sun. Now, this is a perceptual disturbance that is stopping you from seeing the totality of the sun. So now look at you as an altered state of consciousness and the sun as consciousness itself. Now, this altered state of consciousness, because it has formed around a conscious center which has been blocked, partially or completely, now this altered state of consciousness is trying to perceive itself amidst of all this disturbance. Because altered state of consciousness is also consciousness. Consciousness cannot be divided. But it can be perceptually clouded by thoughts. And by its very nature, consciousness is a totality. So when it tries to perceive its own totality through the disturbance of thoughts, because thoughts are blocking it, it casts a shadow. In exactly the same way that light casts a shadow when a three-dimensional body blocks it, consciousness, which is four-dimensional, when blocked by thoughts which are four-dimensional, it casts a three-dimensional shadow. Our three-dimensional world, including everything in it, is a three-dimensional shadow of this four-dimensional consciousness. Now, that is the collapse of the wave function. Because thoughts exist in 4D, they are all superposition. You cannot identify a single thought. You cannot identify a single particle because it's not even in 3 dimensions. In a way, it has no restriction to be many things at the same time. In our 3-dimensional world, things move in a certain way. Things exist in a certain way because of the limitation. It's a dimensional limitation. But in the 4th dimension, there's no limitation. Waves a same particle can be moving towards the left and right at exactly the same time. Now, this is impossible for us to understand. But in the 4th dimension, it's a very common thing. This is what is called superposition. All possible combinations can simply exist and be stacked one on top of each other without it fundamentally affecting consciousness in any way. Now, this is not even some mysterious property of consciousness. If we understand the rules of dimensions, we will see this ability is natural when you move from a lower dimension to a higher dimension. Let's say you're moving from one-dimensional line to a two-dimensional plane. Now, assuming, let's say, there's a one-dimensional line of a certain size at a certain place. Now, just assuming that now it's no longer in one dimension, it's in two-dimensional plane, that exact same line can be stacked infinitely in exactly the same place. Without changing its size, without changing its position, one line can be represented as infinite number of lines. You only have to move from one dimension to higher. That is what a higher dimension does. Higher dimension adds this additional dimension at every point, which makes it possible for a fixed object sitting in one place to be all kinds of things. This is what we refer to as a superposition. And then, when it is observed, the wave function collapses. Again, what does this mean? It just means that consciousness, as an altered state, is choosing one of the states of the many. In that moment, it is choosing one. That is what is the collapse of the wave function. From a four-dimensional entity, it is becoming a three-dimensional entity. Now again, this 4 and 3 are not just simple numbers. In 4 dimensions, the combinations for an object is infinite. It is not like a wave is moving somehow in 4 different directions and it is collapsing and becoming three-dimensional and we can understand it. 4 dimensions means each possibility, each object exists in infinite possible combinations. Higher dimension is not just adding additional spatial dimension. It is a process of taking a single point in the lower dimension to infinity. This is why it has been hard for us to understand. We've been trying to define dimensions as spatial. We've been trying to add more dimensions to our spatial dimension and talking in terms of 5 dimensions, 6 dimensions, 11 dimensions as in string theory, sometimes even 20, 21 dimensions. I mean, this shows we have completely lost the sense of what a dimension is. A dimension is not just addition of the same thing. You can add infinite number of lines together, one-dimensional lines. You can put them in infinite number of combinations. Still, you will not get a two-dimensional plane. Why not? Because one-dimensional line is lacking thickness. If it does not have thickness, even if you stack infinite number of them, it does not make a plane. It will still be a one-dimensional line. Now, this is the fundamental nature of dimensions. You cannot add many lower dimensional elements and create a higher dimension. You cannot stack infinite number of two-dimensional planes and create a three-dimensional space. You cannot. In imagination, it feels, isn't that how a higher dimension is created? Let's say I put a plane, a two-dimensional plane. I put one more next to it, one more next to it, one more next to it. I keep on stacking it. Now, I have a three-dimensional entity which has length, breadth, and height. Completely wrong. A two-dimensional plane has no thickness whatsoever. It has only length and breadth. It has no height. Which means, even if you stack infinite number of them, it does not create 3 dimensions. It is lacking something that you cannot simply add. In exactly the same way, we cannot create or we cannot get to the 4th dimension by simply stacking 3-dimensional spaces. This has been our problem. We have been stuck in our three-dimensional thinking, three-dimensional mathematics, and we have assumed that this same mathematics should apply everywhere. In reality, it only applies to our dimension and lower. It does not apply to a higher dimension. That is why mathematically we have hit a brick wall in terms of trying to understand the higher dimension. If you try to mathematically solve the problem of the fourth dimension, you need to exhaust infinite number of combinations before giving up, before saying our mathematics is unable to do this. We will come up with all kinds of theories. String theory and M theory are just examples. For the rest of our available time, we'll be playing with all kinds of different ideas of twisting space, curling space, mathematically trying to make sense of this higher dimension. But we will never arrive at consciousness because you're only stacking space. How can you stack space and arrive at consciousness? In exactly the same way, how can you stack lines and arrive at a plane? How can you stack planes and arrive at a three-dimensional space? Once it is established that a higher dimension exists, all lower dimensions are simply mathematical abstractions. They are not realities. At the most, the lower dimension can exist as a shadow in a higher dimension. In exactly the same way, our three-dimensional world exists as a zero thickness shadow on the fourth dimension. That is why infinite possible combinations of our three-dimensional thoughts can be superpositioned without them taking any space in consciousness, without diminishing it in any way, without affecting its properties in any way. Because our three dimensions, just like a two-dimensional plane, lacks thickness. It is zero thickness. Whatever we are experiencing is a pure surface phenomenon. Complete surface phenomenon. The inside is always imagined. It is never actually there. When we try to investigate into this inside, we have to split between two moments. I cannot look at an inside of an apple and the outside at the same time. That itself says the inside is hidden from me. When I cut the apple, I'm not looking at the inside of an apple, I'm looking at the outside of another apple. In fact, I'm not even looking at another apple, I'm looking at half an apple. As far as existence is concerned, one apple and half an apple are two completely different things because they are two different projections happening at two different times. Existence is complete, it's projecting from the present moment. Now, how can we take two separate moments, put them together and say, apple should have an inside because it has seeds in it? The only time we can accept that something has an inside is if we can see both the inside and outside simultaneously in exactly the same moment. But that is impossible. In our three-dimensional world, when we are looking at the outside, the inside is hidden. When we are looking at the inside, the outside is hidden, which simply means the concept of inside doesn't even exist in our world. Because it is a phenomenon that is sitting atop of a higher dimension, the fourth dimension, which is consciousness itself.